record button, and everyone will need to press the got it to accept. Fab, great. So, pnawn da a croeso diolch am ddod heddiw. Eileen dwi, cadeirydd cyfiawnder Masnach Cymru. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Eileen, the Chair of Trade Justice Wales. Welcome to Sustainable Development and Trade, the EU's approach. We're pleased to welcome Virginia, who's the Project and Policy Officer at the Fair Trade Advocacy Office, to present to us today about how the EU approaches sustainable development in trade. We will hear from Virginia and then have an opportunity for questions and discussion afterwards. So first I'd like to say croeso, welcome Virginia. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do, that would be great.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Catherine, as well, for organizing the session. Apologies, and inviting the Fair Trade Advocacy Office. So, as I mentioned, our name is Fair Trade Advocacy Office. If you have read it, it's the FTIO. We are based in Brussels. We are a joint initiative from Fair Trade International, so the certification scheme, and WTO, the other certification scheme for social enterprises. But we work on advocacy towards EU institutions so that EU policies in general promote fair trade values, principles, practices. So we do not defend one specific certification scheme or a label, but overall the demands from the movement. As such, we are a small office of around 10 people, but we work over a lot of different thematic work streams. Sometimes linked to EU policy developments, but sometimes on topics that are very crucial and where we need to push for a policy development, for example. But we had a overall widespread range of topics. For example, myself, I work on EU trade policy, agri-food issues, including, for example, unfair trading practices. We focus also on textiles, deforestation, cocoa, sustainable cocoa supply chains, competition policy, HRDD, etc., etc. And in the capacity of a policy officer at the FTIO is that I'm here today to speak a bit on what is the concept of trade and sustainable development, and particularly what has been the ultimate updates on the trade and sustainable development policy from the EU side, and also presenting a bit of challenge for the audience on how you can use all these concepts or these trends at the EU level in the work that you're developing. So
that is great. Thanks so much, Virginia. Yeah, I know a lot of people are quite interested to hear what's been going on for the past few years. So yeah, I think we'll head straight on to your presentation.
Yeah, I think Catherine will share the screen. Lovely, thank you. If you could put it in, yeah, thanks. So yeah, the title that I chose is Trade and Sustainable Development as a question, and that's going to be the challenge that I have for you at the end. You will see I want to develop further the discussion on for whom are we speaking about sustainable development, and is it really, are we really achieving sustainable development through the trade agreements? So I will focus, as I said, on the EU's recent changes on TSD policy. And I want to start saying that generally, when we speak of trade and sustainable development, we are referring to the trade and sustainable development chapters that are included in the so-called new generation trade agreements. However, this chapter still does not exist for all trade agreements. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the EU has over 100 trade agreements in force or in the process, but from those, only 19 trade agreements would have and or will have a trade and sustainable development chapter. So that's already a very interesting point to keep in mind, because then, okay, if you don't have a trade and sustainable development chapter in the trade agreement, the capacities that the different countries have to push commitments in that regard are less, because you don't have an obligation put in paper in between two governments or countries as to push development forward on those areas. Next slide, please. So yeah, the question here is, why are these chapters so relevant, and or what is the role of the EU, and why should the EU put in place these chapters or this concept of trade and sustainable development? Why should the EU care at all if it were thinking about sustainable development in other countries? Well, the reason is that the EU is a powerful trade player. It's one that has developed strong and cooperative relationships with the free trade agreement partners. The EU also is well placed to use its market power to improve the implementation and enforcement of multilateral environmental and climate agreements, as well as of labor and human rights around the world. Furthermore, the EU is the world's largest trading bloc. The EU is the top trading partner for around 80 countries. There are about 130 trade agreements in place, pending, or in the process of being adopted or negotiated. The EU also uses trade agreements to set standards for environment and labor. For example, to avoid the importation of the import of products produced using child labor, or to put forward other EU standards in trade agreements. Besides the trade aspect, the EU also has human rights as a priority in their foreign policy. The EU is committed to supporting democracy and human rights in its external relations. This is part of its founding principles of liberty, democracy, and respect. Actually, in the Treaty on the European Union, you have articles referring to how the EU, in its relations with other countries, has to put as a priority, or has to work further into the respect of human rights. But as you can see, the point on the elephant in the room, we can also not forget or deny that as the EU has a position of a major trading bloc, even before the EU was conformed, meaning like the EU's individual member states were already very important trading partners, the EU has developed or encountered or created an influence in how market structures were conceived, what trade agreements and what models were set for trading practices was in a way determined by the EU. That's why also you have all market structure and trading practices that, as it's our view, do not work for the EU, but do not work for other countries. That's the question of like trade and sustainable development, really. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture to give you an overview of the countries that are covered by EU trade agreements. So as you can see, light blue is the countries where you don't have anything, and that color is not really present. So you can see the influence of the EU all over the world. And as I said, it's made the top trading partner for around 80 countries. So they actually do have an influence. But then again, let's remember, as I said at the beginning, this trade and sustainable development chapter, you can only find it in 19 countries out of the 130 trade agreements that the EU has in place or wants to have in place. Next slide, please. Now, with that brief intro, I want to move a bit to the process of review that has led to the new trade and sustainable development policy. So up until 2018, in 2019, the Commission Services prepared a non-paper on how to implement the trade and sustainable development chapters in the new trade agreements. So that was a sort of a non-paper, a soft law document that was guiding how to implement the commitments of these chapters in the trade agreements. Why? Because there is, in the way that these chapters are developed or designed or put in place, the commitments are quite vague, and it has been not so easy to enforce and to draw the lines between fulfillment or non-fulfillment of the obligations. That's what there was a non-paper on, okay, how this should be implemented. But then in June, in 2020, the European Commission announced that they will launch a review of this non-paper. And that's why in 2021, they launched an in-depth process to revise this non-paper from 2018, with the objective of strengthening the ability of trade agreements as a whole to be a champion on sustainable trade and in cooperation with the trade partners. For this, they commissioned study that I can send you later the link, because that one shows a bit more like the comparison between the different trade and sustainable development chapters and mechanisms in other trade agreements not involving the EU. And also launch a public consultation with where every stakeholder is invited to share input if they wish to do so. A major outcome from the study that they commissioned is that it confirmed that the EU is one of the key front runners in promoting sustainability via its trade agreements, even though you only have 19 countries that have these TSD chapters. And then the outcome of this review that took place in 2021, the magic happened, and you had now the new TSD policy with a new communication, which is also a non-binding document, but still a bit more formal than a non-paper as it was in 2018. And they put the name, the power of trade partnerships together for green and just economic growth. And I put the emphasis on green because you will see later why. Next slide, please. So, okay, in this process of review, part of the demands that were more highly brought forward by civil society is first the need of having more concrete, binding, and enforceable chapters. This is what I briefly mentioned a few minutes ago. They needed to be a better integration of the TSD, Trade and Sustainable Development objectives, across all the chapters of the agreement. So not a silo chapter, but something that is mainstreamed throughout the entire agreement. There was a call or a demand to have the ratification and the implementation of international conventions as an essential clause of the Fair Trade Agreement, because what has happened is that, okay, there is a commitment to ratify a certain ILO conventions, but then it doesn't happen, or it stops at the ratification, but then it does not move to implementation. So then what's the real change in the ground? Doubtfully that it's a lot. There was also calls for more specific, measurable, and enforceable sustainability obligations, because the more detailed the provisions, the more effectively and promptly that a party's breach of a specific obligation can be addressed. For example, if you have an obligation of promoting corporate social responsibility by providing supportive policy frameworks that encourage the uptake of relevant practices by businesses. I mean, I don't see your faces, but can you tell me that you find really what you have to do, or how do you see if you did enough progress in that regard or not? It's not so easy. So that's exactly the problem that civil society was calling for, like address the fact that this is not very concrete, this is not very binding, because if I say promote, what do I have to do? What is enough? And then enforceable, because what is the sanction if I don't do it, for instance? A point that I'm putting in black there is the country by country approach. So civil society was demanding that instead of copy paste Trade and Sustainable Development chapters, which is what you have now, that you really tailor it down to the needs and the realities of the different countries. Because if you look at them, the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter between the EU and Chile, which is under negotiation, is exactly the same as the one for India. And clearly the countries couldn't be more different one from the other. So how can it be that when you're thinking of sustainable development, which also clearly relates to different realities in the ground, that you have the same commitments or the same objectives? It doesn't really make sense. And then the question again, sustainable development, really? It's a question, right? Another call from civil society was to have better involvement of civil society, major role, more important role, more binding role of civil society, and the same for the domestic advisory groups. For those that may not know, the domestic advisory groups are groups that are set out at the EU side and the partner side, and it's groups of civil society that monitor the implementation of these agreements. I mean, not the agreements, the chapters, the TSD chapters. So if you listen to it, oh, that's very important. They must be very relevant, where they were not in the past. Like they didn't have enough organization, they didn't have enough resources, they didn't receive enough information from the commission or from the governments on the other side. So it was tricky. Another very important point that was highlighted by civil society was the need to introduce staged implementation of tariffs. This means tariff reductions linked to the effective implementation of TSD provisions, and clarifying also what conditions the countries are expected to meet for reaching these reductions in tariffs, including also the possibility of withdrawing those tariffs in the event of breach of the provisions in the TSD chapters. And the final point that I want to highlight as demands from the civil society side was the need to introduce sanctions for non-compliance, such as the suspension of the trade agreement or the suspension of the tariffs. So what happened up until the new TSD policy is that for breaches of TSD chapters commitments, you had a special panel of experts that would handle with the breach, but then they would just had a final decision saying, okay, let's say country XX needs to ratify ILO convention, I don't know, number 20, and that's it. No sanction, nothing further. So, I mean, you can already think that that was not enough to ensure compliance with what was already needed to be complied with. That's why civil society was calling for the introduction of sanctions. Next slide, please. Now, in June of 2022, we had the outcome, the communication that I referred to already. On the good side, it has introduced the country-by-country approach. The Commission has manifested that there will be need now to negotiate with partner countries tailored objectives and time-bound roadmaps for more effective results and for implementation. Also, on the good side, they have referred to the need of mainstreaming sustainability throughout the entire agreement, which means that now the TSD chapter is not treated so much as a niche or a silo chapter, but that sustainability is throughout the entire agreement. For that, they have extended the standard dispute settlement mechanism that was in place for all the other chapters of the agreement, also to the TSD. So what I mentioned just before about the panel of experts, that some details, but it does not go anymore. And now if you have a breach of a TSD chapter commitment, you will go through the same dispute settlement mechanism that was already in place for all the other aspects, all the other chapters of the agreement. So that's a positive sign in not treating it as much as a silo. There is a more institutional approach, which means that they are introducing more clear priorities and roles for each of the EU institutions. They refer to how member states and the parliament, for instance, need to monitor the implementation of the TSD commitments, for example. So there is a clearer role for each EU institution, which is also very, very good. And the last good point that I want to highlight of the new TSD policy. It's a larger civil society involvement in all the stages. Especially what we highlight is that it would be easier for civil society and for the domestic advisory groups to present complaints on violations of sustainability commitments. Currently, there is a system in place to present complaints, but there was no clear guidelines on the deadlines or the times to process the complaints or what needed to be presented, etc. And because of that, only one complaint was introduced since the mechanism was put in place in 2020. And that does not mean that there were not violations of sustainability commitments. It may, can be, but may very well be also that, as I said, if it's hard to determine what is your obligation, then how can you say that there is a violation of that? And you don't have enforcement mechanisms, so how do you know what to ask for concretely? So that should be, in a way, addressed now on forward for the future. However, on the bad side, the vague language of the TSD commitments is not addressed at all. So there is no mention on the need to replace, let's say, some verbs instead of promote or something like we'll put in place a roadmap for implementation, etc. Nothing. So the language will most likely remain the same, which is non-committal. And then it makes all of us question, okay, but if you're not changing the language, how effective is going to be all the other changes that you're doing? Like, how enforceable is it going to be if the language stays the same? So it's a bit of a downside anyway. One very important shortcoming in our view as Fair Trade Advocacy Office is that they are only focusing on environmental sustainability. They have introduced a mechanism to open new markets for, or to promote markets of import and export of green goods and services and raw materials, which is particularly important to reduce the dependencies in the current geopolitical climate, but they are not referring to any other products that pertain to social or economic sustainability. So it's only about green goods and those that are to support the energy transition, which we can very well imagine it refers to the EU's energy transition. So that's not a good side at all. For example, you can see that some of the points that were the demands are not included in the outcome. There is no introduction of a tariff differentiation. For instance, from the FTIO and with other partners, we were asking for the EU to introduce reduced tariffs for fair trade products, for example, in saying, okay, these are products that work in the achievement of sustainability in the sense of that it tackles environmental, social, and economic sustainability, and it's produced by companies or businesses in most cases that, you know, are also contributing to the resilience of the producing country, or etc. But it was not included. And another very big shortcoming is that there are no sanctions for non-compliance with human rights conventions. This means that responding to a demand from civil society, they have introduced sanctions, but it's only for serious violations of ILO fundamental principles and material breaches of the Paris Agreement. So there is no reference to human rights, less so to sanctions for human rights violations as detailed in the convention. So that's a downside. Now, next slide, please. Thank you. One of the main questions that we presented ourselves when the Commission unveiled the new communication was like, okay, does all this nice wording apply to only new agreements, to those that are in the pipeline, to those that are already in place? And not good. The Commission responded, this applies only to agreements that will be negotiated in the future. So this means that for Chile, Mercosur, Mexico, they are not introducing this new TSD policy into the text of the trade agreement, which is really a pity because, yeah, I mean, I don't need to go in further about the issues on the Mercosur agreement, and it would have been very good approach to include this new TSD policy, this new way of doing things of the European Commission into the text of the agreement, and it's not going to happen. Another very relevant question that we posted ourselves is, as I said, what happens with those agreements that are already in place? And for one agreement that is particularly important for us at the FTAO and for the movement in general is the one from with Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, that it's already been implemented, it's already in force. And for those kind of agreements, the Commission said, like, you can develop roadmaps for implementation. So you are not revising the text, you are not changing the text of the agreement to introduce this new approach. You just need to negotiate a roadmap with the partners. So that's also a shortcoming, particularly, okay, so for those agreements that are already in force, you can begin to understand, okay, it's hard to open again a negotiation, etc., when you're reviewing. But for those that are still not ratified or not closed, not signed, as Chile, Mexico, and Mercosur, you could very well have waited and introduced this new approach, which would be beneficial for both parties. But that's another shortcoming, very, very big, that this new approach has. Next slide, please. So in terms of opportunity, because this is a question that was posted to me by the Fair Trade movement, where they said, okay, we understand all the information that you are sharing, but it's hard for us to see where we can engage and how, and where is the added value of that. So you have to first look into, okay, which countries are relevant for the work that we are doing. As I mentioned, for example, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru is very important for us because they are a producing country. So we're monitoring their implementation, and we are monitoring the closing of Mercosur and Chile and Mexico and what happens with India. There are also some rumors, or not beyond rumors, like demands of introducing a TSD chapter in the partnership agreement with Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So there are various windows of opportunity in terms of agreements that are in the pipeline or to be discussed in the future that can be relevant for the Fair Trade movement to engage. And the way to engage is, as I said, as a civil society actor in general, through the domestic advisory groups at both parties, through the European Parliament, through the European Economic and Social Committee, and also through the EU delegations. So, okay, I see how this at level of Wales is a bit less relevant. But for example, through the EU delegations, what we do is we have demanded the EU delegation in Chile to conduct a study on EU and Chile market of fair trade products. So they have launched a full project around this. And this is a way on how we as civil society at EU level, but also at Chilean level, can engage and oversee what happens with the implementation of China's sustainable development commitments. But a problem that remains, that has not been addressed and most likely could not have been addressed through the new TSD policy, it's the lack of transparency that there is in general with negotiation processes, and the behind the door policy, which means that due to the lack of transparency, everything is decided in between closed doors, and civil society only has access when it's a bit too late, so to say, but when things are no longer possible to influence in a way. Next slide, please. And now this was the question. Oh, no, thank you. This was the question or challenge that I wanted to pose to you. And this is a question where at FTAO level, we want to focus from now on. And it's asking ourselves, sustainable for whom? Okay, we have trade and sustainable development, but is it really being sustainable for both parties? Is it only being sustainable for the EU? When you hear concepts such as the dirty truth of the mobility transformation, or the real cost of electric cars, or people die for our electric cars, there is a rationale, or there are facts behind such concepts. For example, in the pictures you have to the left, the part of the Amazon in Brazil, and to the right you have the Atacama Desert in Chile. I forgot to mention, but I'm from Chile, so the topic of sustainable for whom really touches my core. And I want to share a bit more about the example of Chile, so you can better understand the question of sustainable for whom. In the Laguna, in the Lake Chaxa, which is a nature reserve from the lithium mine in the Atacama Desert, the employees are reluctant to talk about the impact of mining of lithium. When they are asked if the lake used to be larger, the people from there say clearly this used to be a continuous lake, not a dry pond. The drying up of the lagoons and the lakes mainly affects the flamingos, like flamingos also, which in turn feed on the microorganisms in the water, and who then in turn are a dietary staple of foxes. So the entire biodiversity is affected, and the subsistence of neighboring indigenous communities is also affected by the drop in the groundwater level. So affects humans, affects nature, affects the fauna in the place, everything. With the current trade agreement model and the trade practices, for example, in those countries that export raw materials, the model of extractivism, because of this, Chile is getting farther from achieving sustainable development, as they are facilitating the EU's transition to greener energies. So with the current trade agreement models, what happens, at least in Chile, is that they take all the minerals, they take all the lithium, and everything is exported as a raw material to other countries, to the EU. So the added value in Chile is zero. Nothing is left there, because you take the material, you don't process it there, you don't produce anything, you don't manufacture with it, you just take the raw material and take it out. And then the negative consequences, the environmental impact, stays there. And by the way that these agreements are set out, you don't establish any commitments for the importing country, let's say, to work on the environmental degradation or remediate affected communities. Nothing is happening there. And in this case in particular, when you extract lithium, is to enable, batteries and further process other manufacture, produce other elements, which will allow the EU to move towards greener energies. So by taking everything from one country, you are enabling the EU to achieve sustainable development, but you can see in the other country, which is also part of the trade agreement, which is an equal party to the EU in the trade agreement, is getting farther from achieving sustainable development. Instead of a trade-off, there should be win-win situations arising from trade agreements. So our demand has been always, and now even more, that trade agreements have to be designed as a partnership of equals, striking a balance between more trade, but also more sustainability for both sides. So there should be more ownership and legitimacy of trade agreements, and they should be more increasingly scrutinized and criticized by EU citizens. So no more of a behind-door policy. And that's why we demand the EU to review their premise of trades as a primary objective, and is to increase trade volumes and support economic growth, while environmental, social, and human rights considerations are side effects to be mitigated. That view should be gone, and it should be replaced by, if we have more trade, we need to have more sustainability. You need to really have sustainable trade, because otherwise you cannot reach sustainable development, or you can maintain the effect that only on the EU side you get closer to achieve sustainable development, and on the other countries from whom you are importing to, they are getting farther away from sustainable development. Thank you. That's a brief intro. Enough for your questions.
Thank you so much, Virginia. That's really interesting to kind of hear what's going on, both the processes, what's happened in the past few years, and also that last point that's come up with us several times with sort of fair trade producers having their land potentially being used to feed electric cars, and that balance of we need to make a transition, and how do we make sure we do that fairly. So that's brilliant. Has anybody got any questions they would like to ask? Feel free to physically put your hand up, write in a box, use the raise hand mechanism if you can find it. We're not so big that we need to have a specific process. Everyone's being very polite. Oh, yes, Hugh Roberts. Can you figure out how to unmute?
Hi there, and sorry about that. I was on a different page somewhere. Yeah, that was really, really interesting, Virginia. Thank you so much for that. I was just to get your perspective on the elements that you've spoken about today. You know, I work for Welsh Government on a trade policy role, and we're looking at this kind of these areas of trade policy in terms of the receptive qualities from other countries. I know you've given us a little bit of background in terms of that, and the more traditional ways of looking at free trade agreements and things. But how receptive are more traditional sort of countries to these sort of relatively new concepts really of free trade agreements, things, especially some of the things that you've discussed in today's webinar?
All right, I'm joining some ideas before I answer to you. Oh, I don't know, Aileen, if you want to take more questions, or I just reply to you.
Let's go for replying to this one for now,
Yep.
and then normally it takes a little while to warm up for people with questions. So thank you for going first, Hugh.
Yeah, good. It's a nice question, John. I think actually it's very complicated to answer because you have different perspectives and you have different needs. And I could say, like, from an EU perspective, you have also different approaches. You have some countries that, without saying it, but they want to put in place protectionist policies as to protect, EU industries. So that's one vision that they present towards more commitments on sustainable development. And on the other side, you have countries that understand the need of clear commitments for sustainable development. And then on another side, you also have countries that are fully free trade and that they do not want any rules in any case. They want to open and just leave it to the market to define itself. So even within the EU, you can find different perspectives towards trade agreements. And then from the side of the countries, the third countries, you also have different views. For example, I've heard or read that, okay, in China, for instance, has been hard to move any further with any negotiations because they don't want to take any commitments on human rights, for example. So then you have a vision. In the case of India, I know that the negotiation has encountered some disparities of views in regards to sustainable food system chapters, which is a chapter that is similar to the trade and sustainable development, where India did not want to have any commitments, that they found already that the vague language of these chapters was already too burdensome for them. When, for example, from the side of civil society, we're saying this is not enforceable enough, this is just wishy-washy talking, and this will lead to nothing. But then you see that a country as India say like, okay, this is already too burdensome. So you have different views also depending on the country. And that's also very relevant to know, because it links directly to what I mentioned, the need to have a country by country approach, where a trade agreement model as a copy-paste model may very well not be a good instrument to tackle the diversity of each country. And that's clearly reflected by the different views that the countries have. In the case of Chile, for example, what I know is that they are very much against the model of extractivism, and they want to have added value staying in the country. They want to have a transfer of technologies, a transfer of knowledge, but the EU does not want to give that for obvious reasons. And Chile really needs the exports to live on, so they agree on whatever the EU wants. So you have then another example, like a country may have a hard position, or like, okay, we need to work more in what's good for us, but when they see themselves against the rope in like, okay, if we put ourselves in a more confrontational position with the EU, they're going to say that they don't want to close the agreement anymore, and that situation is even worse. So okay, let's accept as little as they give us because we need the agreement. So as I said, I was giving you examples for you to see how it's diverse per country.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I mean, just a point, that's all, in terms of, when you look at regions like CPTPP, and I know, Aileen, we've spoken about things like this, the complexities of things like that, where you've got multi-layered areas within each sort of country as well. It's and that's the appreciation really of how complex it is at the moment. And do you see this as a sort of, and I'm sorry I'm hogging this, do you see the processes that we're doing now in terms of a foundation sort of phase that culturally, for all the different free trade agreements in all the countries with all the different standards, do you see progress on that, in terms of, we know it's early days and a lot of things, but it's a foundation thing, but are you seeing progress?
Yeah, but tiny steps,
Yeah.
What you would need, because we're speaking about, sustainable development and the 2020, 2030 objectives. So thinking of that, no, it's not enough. This is clearly not enough. But okay, if you look at where you were, has it changed a bit? Yeah, it has changed a bit. But if you ask me, there is progress, but it's not enough. And still, like, for example, by the fact that the new TSD policy only refers or establishes conditions for the promotion of environmental, meaning green goods, it's also a sign of the lack of progress in civil society, or everyone in general, really having clear that sustainability is not only about environmental sustainability, but it's about social and economic sustainability. So that's already a very big loss, that the new TSD policy only focuses on green goods and dismisses all the other aspects of sustainability. So that clearly is not progress. I mean, you could say it's a bit of progress because it's sustainability, okay, but
Okay.
depends if you're optimistic or pessimist.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for your answer, anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And yeah, about green goods and sort of what that's becoming very popular at the moment, and it's very important. But then what does that mean, and what are the implications of a green good, and what does that look like, is quite complex, isn't it? We've had a question in the chat from Oliver. Hey, Oliver. So it's asking about businesses. Obviously, we have the trade agreements, but when implementation is happening, it's businesses that mostly are abiding by them and trading products and services across. So this question is asking how we incentivize businesses outside of the EU to take up sustainable development practices, and it could be more expensive for them to carry out the practices, sort of. So it's got some similarity to Hugh's question in sort of what about these partner countries, but the businesses sort of within them, what are the ways that we can be supportive of that? Obviously, you are working on the EU, whereas Wales at the moment is under UK kind of trade agreements, but I think a lot of the issues will be similar here.
Yeah, no, that's a very nice question, because it moves us from the perspective of countries towards demand and offer, and more middle of the supply chain interaction. And and this is very well connected to EU policies at non-country level, so like from the top down, from the bottom up instead of from the top down at the government level. And to answer simply to your question, you need to increase the demand. So for example, I mentioned a study that has been done in the context of the EU delegation in Chile and the agreement between the EU and Chile. And there the conclusion is like there is a market of fair trade in Chile, but there is not enough demand from the EU. So that in turn means that there cannot be more production of fair trade products at Chilean level, because then it's not paying for that. Like I'm not selling it at the fair trade price level, and I need to sell it as a common product, and it's not profitable for the companies there. So increasing the demand. And then in turn you ask yourself, okay, how do we increase the demand? And then you have to look, this is very EU related, but you can extrapolate it to your sphere. But how to increase the demand at the EU level? You can resort to public procurement, for example. So there are initiatives at the EU level, an initiative at the EU level to establish minimum criteria for sustainable food public procurement. And then you can increase sustainability by saying a minimum of 25% of the products bought or put available in a public canteen need to be organic or need to be fair trade products. Then you're increasing overall the demand, and that means that, okay, from where you're sourcing those products, they will need to produce more, or they will be more incentivized to produce more in a sustainable way, because they will see how the demand is growing on the other side. Another example is when you link it, or when you think of initiatives such as the corporate sustainability due diligence directive or the deforestation regulation. The idea is to move everything towards sustainable production. So that's also a way of, you will increase the demand artificially. It will not come directly from consumers, but it will be like the government's increasing the demand, and it should transform the practices on how you're producing in the producing countries or the exporting countries. A third way is to make better use of the information that is made available to consumers. So what we see at the EU level is that consumers have a willingness to pay for more sustainable products, but to a certain extent, because also they don't see the added value of a sustainable product, because then, okay, what is a sustainable product? For us, it can be obvious to say what's the added value of an organic product, but from other people, it may not be. And then the information that they receive is not enough. So by better controlling the information that is given to consumers, then you increase the demand from those products, and then you push others to produce in that way. And also directly on the trade agreements, that's why we were calling for the introduction of tariff differentiation. So a sustainable product will have to pay, or will be exempt from customs duty or anything. And that would also promote the export of sustainable products.
Thank you, that's great. I think in Wales we have a lot of small and medium businesses, and sometimes sort of there can be, especially with all the new trade deals in the UK, it's a lot of, well, it's a bit too much really to find the time to actually go through them and find what's applicable. So, sort of support and financial incentives and things to help businesses adopt some of these practices can be really useful as well, can't it? And I know that at the moment we've just had COP27, and loss and damage is kind of one of those things, and Fair Trade is campaigning for kind of those climate finance to be given to farmers and workers directly, who have their small businesses, who want to do things better, but if they haven't got the money or the support, how are they going to be able to do that? So yeah. Right, we are almost coming to the end. We've got one more question in the chat box, so I'll read that one. And if anyone else has a burning question, you need to do it now, because we'll take them together before we finish. So Catherine's asking, if there's a greater focus on sustainable development, do you see less specific environment provisions, presuming these are better taken forward through other international initiatives rather than trade agreements?
Absolutely not, quite the opposite. If you have already the precedent that the new TSD policy, it's promoting the market of green goods, I think they will only take it up from there and go further on that direction, because it's directly linked to the EU's objective of achieving the green energy transition. So they cannot let it go. They have to ensure their green energy transition, and this is one of the key ways that they need to use to obtain it. So completely the opposite. I think that from now on, this is like sort of a big loss, that the focus will be on the promotion of environmental goods and etc. And it's really tricky because, okay, you are not considering social, economic sustainability products or concepts, but also because they are so keen in achieving the EU's green energy transition that they have not deeply changed the TSD view, and the impacts that I show you, like in Chile or Mexico with the deforestation, they are not going to change. That's going to continue. And it's with this approach, they have only sort of created a more enabling environment for the EU to obtain the green goods that they need without addressing the issues on the other side. And it's really tricky because, okay, they are ensuring that they will receive the raw materials that the EU needs, and without the support for the countries. And in turn, like, to make things worse, they are introducing autonomous regulation that makes it even trickier. For example, you have the deforestation regulation that is coming from the EU, that will apply in Brazil, that will make it harder for the producers, the exporters in Brazil to comply with. And there are no measures for support, nor through the trade agreement. We don't know what will happen finally with the Mercosur agreement. But let's say it stays as it is. There won't be no support measures, as Eileen was mentioned, for SMEs in Wales. Nothing for them through the agreement, and then the regulation will be heavy on their heads, and voila, how are they going to manage? The EU, it's, well, not my problem. You need to comply with this regulation if you want to import wood materials into the EU. I don't care how you do it in the trade agreement yet. And through the trade agreement also, you need to promote deforestation-free supply chains, but no support measures, nothing. So I'm not very optimistic.
Thank you, though. That's really interesting. And I think in Fair Trade, we do try to go and look at the root cause of the problem. And there's been things, the football's on at the moment, and looking at where the majority of footballs are made, like 70% of the world's footballs are made in Sialkot in Pakistan. And there was a problem with child labour. And so there was a big campaign. And in 2012, they managed to ban child labour. But what they didn't do is help the families whose children were working gain more income. So those children are now working in more dangerous conditions, not on footballs anymore, because they didn't look at the root cause. And I think that's part of what we need to kind of do and talk about. So I want to say diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for coming and being with us today. We've got lots of thank yous in the chat. We do have a quick poll that we will be asking people to fill in if you've got a few minutes. That's just for our sort of funding requirements. And if you are interested in signing up next week to our network meeting, that's an opportunity, not a training, but for us to share together what we're doing and hear, as I said, from Jordan James from the Department for International Trade. So I'm going to ask you to stop the recording now, Catherine.